Let's imagine you just got completely stranded on a remote island in the middle of the ocean. You'd probably expect to see some tiny lizards or crabs scurrying around, but what you'd actually find is much more terrifying. Rats the size of small dogs are scurrying across the forest floor. Reptiles as long as cars are now actively hunting humans as prey. And even the normal looking turtles are now just abnormally gigantic. This is the world of island gigantism,
a phenomenon that most people never even hear about.
Because it only happens on the land masses that are completely isolated from anything else. And while you'd think in a place where there's limited space and limited food to survive that most animals would get smaller to conserve resources, the complete opposite continues to happen. All animals on islands turn into a sort of supersized version of themselves, making the small animals big and the big animals giants. To understand what's actually happening here, let's take a look at what's probably the most blatant example of island gigantism on the entire planet. The Komodo dragon. Many people actually think that Komodo dragons are small dinosaurs, but in reality they're related to dinos about as much as snakes are. These are monitor lizards, and they're in the exact same family as the small, normal-sized lizards you can buy at a pet store. The only difference is, Komodo dragons are only found in Indonesia, and specifically only on islands, with the most famous one being Komodo Island. These guys can reach up to 10 feet long and weigh nearly 200 pounds. But instead of eating insects and little plants like normal lizards do, these guys hunt deer, wild pigs, water buffalo, and they would eat you too. But fortunately, they're still stuck on some random Indonesian islands. Sorry to anyone watching who lives on those islands. On top of being the largest lizard in the world, and even gigantic compared to most other animals, they don't even usually kill you with their size. They'll jump an animal, bite it once, and then just leave. They'll watch the animal slowly die after a few days from the venom it injected, and when it finally collapses from the shock, they'll eat the whole 100-pound carcass. Fun. So why are these the only lizards that got this giant? Well, this all lines up with a pattern that was discovered a while ago for what we call Foster's rule. In the 1960s, a biologist named J. Brostol Foster noticed something extremely weird about island animals. He realized that the bizarre sizes of these creatures weren't even random mutations. Evolution was actually following a strict, predictable pattern. We now call this the island rule, or Foster's rule. And the rule basically goes, if you spend a few million years on an island, you're probably going to evolve into something a lot different than you should be.
Okay, so what's the actual scientific explanation?
Basically, the entire reason for island gigantism comes down to one fundamental thing: fear. On the mainland, small animals spend their entire lives living in absolute terror. If you're a mouse, a lizard, or a small bird, you're getting hunted by basically everything. Hawks, snakes, wolves, foxes, and wildcats. One mistake, you're eaten. And, well, no animals have evolved to be able to respawn yet. Because of this, you're forced to stay small. Being small means you can hide in tiny crevices. Being light means you can run fast and escape. Size is a massive liability when you are trying to hide from a predator because you're just clunky. And so you're probably asking the question, well, if being big on islands is so good, why aren't the normal big things there? Why aren't lions and bears running around dominating them? The thing is, they literally can't make it there. They are literally too chunky and require too much food to survive drifting across the ocean on debris to ever make it to the islands in the first place. So when a small animal washes up on an island, they suddenly find themselves in a world with zero predators, because everything else that got there was small. Things don't just spawn on islands randomly. Somehow they have to get there. Biologists call this the release from predation. When the thing that eats you is completely gone, the need to stay small and hide disappears overnight. You don't need to sprint into a burrow anymore. You don't need to stay light enough to climb thin tree branches. Fear has been costing small animals an enormous amount of calories. Running for your life burns energy. Staying on high alert burns energy. And so remove all that fear, all of the energy is suddenly freed up. Instead of burning calories trying to survive the night, these animals just eat, relax, and become massive. But these effects aren't really just making the animals big. The islands are causing these animals to literally evolve into other animals. Look at the moa. This was a bird that was basically a cow. No, it wasn't a cow with wings, it did mostly look like a bird, but they were completely flightless. Over millions of years, they lost their wings, and not just reduced them, they completely deleted the wing bones from their anatomy. Because there were no ground predators where they lived on the island of New Zealand, what would they ever need to fly away from? Instead, they focused entirely on eating vegetation, and because there was endless food and zero competition from mammals, the moa grew, and they kept growing until they reached 12 feet tall and weighed over 500 pounds. Of course, if you have a 500-pound, not very mobile bird walking, something is going to figure out how to eat it. Since there were no lions or tigers to hunt the giant moa, a normal-sized eagle stepped up to hunt this cowbird. The Hust's eagle evolved to have a wingspan of over 10 feet. Its talons mutated to become the exact same size as the claws of a modern tiger. I speak about this like they just pulled some Transformers move, but keep in mind this happened over millions of years. This eagle was so outrageously massive that it could no longer sustain long flights like normal birds. Instead, it would perch in the high canopy of the forest, wait for a 500-pound moa to walk underneath, and just drop on it like a missile. The talons would pierce straight through the moa's spine, killing a bird the height of a grown man in an instant. The birds are now cows, and the other birds are now death spikes. It almost looked like they were mocking how a mammalian ecosystem worked, but as birds. These giants have a massive psychological limit though, and there's a reason the biggest island giants are only happening in certain animals. If you've been paying attention so far and know anything else about other island giants, you start to see a pattern. The Komodo dragon, the Galapagos tortoise, the dodo, the moa, there's a pretty obvious trend. They are all reptiles and birds. There are almost no examples of massive apex predator mammals evolving from small ancestors on islands, and the reason for this comes down to pure thermodynamics. Mammals are incredibly high maintenance. We are warm-blooded, which means our bodies act like internal furnaces. We have to constantly burn calories just to maintain a core body temperature of 98 degrees. Compare that to a 200-pound reptile like the Komodo dragon. Reptiles are cold-blooded. They do not generate their own body heat. Instead, they just lay out in the sun and let the environment warm them up for free. Because they aren't wasting calories on heating themselves, their metabolism is unbelievably slow. A Komodo dragon can easily survive on 1/10 of the food that a lion needs. They can eat one massive meal and then just completely log off and not eat again for an entire month. And this is the other ultimate cheat code for surviving on an island. Islands have strict limits on how much food they can produce. A small island physically cannot generate enough wild pigs or deer to feed a population of giant warm-blooded mammals. The mammals would eat everything in a week and then immediately starve to death. Remember how I said lions and bears couldn't make it to the islands? Even if they all somehow found jet skis and drove directly to it, they'd all die out within a month. This creates a really weird effect for mammals that many people actually don't talk about when discussing island gigantism, and it's that mammals usually dwarf on islands. They have to shrink to lower their calorie burn. Thousands of years ago, islands in the Mediterranean and Southeast Asia were actually populated by pygmy elephants. These were fully grown, adult elephants that were the size of large dogs. They shrunk down to about 3 feet tall simply because a smaller body requires less food. If they stayed big, they would have completely eaten their island bare and starved to death. Shrinking was the only way to survive. From one perspective, it's kind of a cool alternate universe where you get to see the lizards grow big and the elephants grow small. Unfortunately though, there is one a little disturbing and honestly depressing effect that I haven't mentioned yet. When you live on an island for millions of years with absolutely no predators, something terrifying happens to your brain. Evolution always removes things that you don't use. If you live in a pitch black cave, evolution will delete your eyes. And if you live on an island with nothing to hunt you, evolution will delete your fear. This does not make you a courageous and confident hero. It just removes your ability to sense danger, which is not a good thing. Biologists call this island tameness. When animals don't have to run for their lives, the entire neurological response for panic and flight just slowly rots away. Over generations, the instinct to be afraid is completely scrubbed from their DNA. The dodo is the most famous example of this. When sailors first arrived on the island of Mauritius in the 1500s, the dodos didn't run away or even flinch. They had literally never seen a predator before, so they just casually walked up to the humans out of pure curiosity. They had no concept of violence. They didn't understand what a weapon was. Of course, we all know how the dodo story ends, and the most innocent, curious bird was completely wiped off the face of the earth. Big, flightless innocent birds are not going to be good at hiding from aggressive sailors. Even worse than the sailors was all the other things they brought too. Well, that's debatable, but it still wasn't good. We brought rats on boats, we brought cats, we brought dogs and pigs. These aren't like crazy tigers or bears, but these are mainland animals. They're aggressive, fast, and constantly hungry. Cats still have that kill instinct. Maybe we should start evolving cats on islands, and in a few million years, they'll be ultra cute. Island birds were also always laying their eggs right on the open ground because for millions of years, there was nothing around to steal them. Pigs were just eating these for free. Even more horrifying, the adult birds wouldn't even try to stop them. Their brains physically lacked the instinct to recognize a pig was eating their own babies. The war wasn't even a war, it was just how quickly can we kill these things. The moa in New Zealand also survived for millions of years, only to be completely wiped out shortly after human settlers arrived and started hunting them. Without the moa to eat, the giant husked seagull immediately starved to death and went extinct right alongside them. These giant animals are super cool, but the entire ecosystem is insanely fragile because all it's relying on is one tiny island. Other animals like the giant weta are honestly just terrible designs on mainland despite looking like beasts. Almost all bugs we see are super skittish and will react instantly when they see you trying to squish them, but these bugs just don't do anything. They weigh more than some birds, and because it has zero fear, it completely lost the ability to jump. It just crawls around the dirt like a lazy mouse. They are so incredibly tame that if you hold out a carrot to this absolute unit of an insect, it will literally just sit in your hand and munch on it. The first insect you could keep as a pet, if you really wanted a giant bug in your house. There are still giant hootia today as well, which are pretty much giant tame rats. But to be honest, we killed most of them off, so only a few way smaller species exist around the Caribbean now. These things used to be nearly 400 pounds, basically the size of black bears, and were just large herbivores. Only the smaller 20-pound ones were able to survive us by just not being big enough targets. Even the Galapagos giant tortoise is nearly 1,000 pounds, but still doesn't really do anything. They live for 100 years, survive for months without food or water, and just nibble on plants. Smaller turtles and tortoises can actually move pretty fast in bursts of panic or escape responses. Obviously, that's not really going to be possible for the 1,000-pound tank that has never seen anything more dangerous than a tree in its life. Of course, not every giant animal on islands is weak today. Maybe that's because we killed most of the tame ones off. I already showed you the Komodo dragon, but even things like the giant coconut crab, well, yes, actually eat coconuts as their main source of food because they're big enough to crack them open now. They don't actively hunt humans like Komodos, but due to their sheer size, they are actually dangerous if you don't know how to handle them. Wow, I really hope that guy's a professional. So, what would happen if humans were stuck on an island for millions of years? Would we become giants? Well, no, since we're mammals. So according to the rule, we'd become dwarfs. And that's exactly what happened. In 2003, archaeologists made a discovery on the Indonesian island of Flores where deep inside a limestone cave, they found the skeletal remains of an entirely new species of human. They called them Homo floresiensis, but the scientific community quickly gave them a much more accurate nickname, the Hobbits. These were the fully grown adult humans that stood barely 3 feet tall. They weighed around 50 pounds. They had tools, they used fire, they hunted animals. But Foster's rule massacred their bodies, and they were half the height they would be on mainland. And of course, the hobbits were sharing this island with animals that had gone in the complete opposite direction. The rats on this island were gigantic, called the Flores giant rat, but fortunately, they weren't really hunting people. But yes, you had 3-foot-tall humans using tiny stone spears to hunt miniature elephants, defending themselves from enormous Komodo dragon monsters who are now actually monsters compared to 3 feet people, all while giant mutant rats were scurrying around. It proves that the laws of the island evolution are absolute. They do not care how smart you are. They do not care if you can build fires or craft tools. If you are trapped on an island, biology will morph your body to fit the math of your environment. For as grand as gigantism is, it's not really an unstoppable force. These environments are super delicate and they only work in total silence. absolute unbroken isolation is needed. The second the outside world leaks in, the entire system instantly collapses. Currently, most mainland designs will win against island designs, even if Komodo dragons are way scarier than normal lizards. A bear will absolutely stomp a Komodo. Cats are way more ferocious than any of these flightless birds. In some ways, it can be a naive and peaceful world on the islands, but as the modern world becomes more and more connected, that safety is vanishing. Ships, planes, and global trade mean that true isolation practically doesn't exist anymore. Modern industrial transportation is not really going to be taken into account by a couple of goofy birds. Thank you guys so much for watching, and check out this video about why everything is terrified of spiders.